Metro 2033 is a post-apocalyptic first-person shooter set in the hollowed-out and scorched ruins of the Russian metro. The game is an odd, uneven, and eclectic mix of first-person gunplay and stealth. It moves and acts like the love child of Half-Life and Stalker. This is intended as the first of a three-part series that will be analyzing and critiquing the entirety of the Metro series, that is, Metro 2033, Metro Last Light, and Metro Exodus. These games are all unique in their own way, and I think really compelling. The video itself will be flowing in and out of plot details, critique, and some analysis that I'll focus on later. But I do warn all viewers that this is intended to be a full run-through of the plot and story elements, so if you haven't played the game, or if you do want to play it, I'd recommend doing so now and coming back to this video later. While the idea of a post-apocalyptic first-person shooter is nothing new, in fact it is arguably a trite, well-trodden genre convention that has overstepped its bounds and overstayed its welcome, Metro 2033 makes a concerted effort to provide a faithful rendition of the Russian novels of the same name, and provide a properly conceived of vision of an Eastern European post-apocalyptic future. In much the same way that Fallout imbibes the peculiar forlornness of the American mythos, and the lone, wandering gunman existing in the darkly comic, sarcastic, and sardonic landscape of an atomized 50s, poking cheeky fun at consumerism and imperialism while still relishing in the nascent falsities of the very era, Metro itself addresses what the apocalypse would feel like from a uniquely Russian perspective, albeit it trades in much of the wry humor, wanderlust, and sarcasm for a brutally bleak and twisted reality. As Dmitry Glukhovsky, author of the original Metro novels, remarked in an interview with VG 24/7, quote, "This incredibly nostalgic, bleak, regretful tonality of the Russian post-apocalypse stems from the fact that we had this feeling, just like people in the Dark Ages and medieval times, that the golden age of civilization was long gone, and you were looking into the past with a great nostalgia, thinking that the higher paramount of culture and science and civilization was already gone. You fear the future because you know for sure that every tomorrow is going to be worse than every today. You look back with awe and admiration and nostalgia, and you miss all those days. You understand that they are gone forever, and you have no hope for the future." End quote. The world of Metro is harsh. But even this last quote that I read from Glukhovsky, in its dourness and melancholia, still retains some sense of optimism, that these towering Golden Age days ever existed at all. And it is that ideological trapping that is harshly critiqued in the Metro series. It is one of the reasons that I believe the series is as relevant and necessary as ever. Hope has been systematically drained from every man, woman, and child, yet they survive, alone amidst the filth and squalor of the dilapidated metro system, but they can only stand together. While Metro 2033, the first entry in the Metro series, is arguably my least favorite game of the bunch, I believe it sets the foundation for a solid but decidedly anxious franchise. As we move throughout the series, the games themselves will bolster in confidence. The team will become trusting of the players, confident in their abilities to take in a story, to take in a beautifully and intricately constructed world, and allow the player to truly settle into the dim future of Metro. Metro 2033 is, as of this year, and as of last month, 10 years old, and I think now is as good a time as any to reflect upon this cult series of shooters. I was young when I first played Metro 2033, probably too young to even get anything significant from it had I actually sat through it all the way. But years later, when I actually sat down and beat the game for the first time, what struck me most viscerally was the resounding sense of place and atmosphere. Metro 2033 is one of the few games that, when I think back on it, has a well-developed sense of atmosphere and tonality. When I think of Metro, I don't reflect upon the gameplay, but rather I feel the Metro. It's one of those few games that I would sit in front of and consider the smells of a location. The feel of Artyom's boots sinking into the putrefied water, the haze of Artyom's breath upon the visor of the gas mask, the small beads of perspiration forming along the edges. Playing Metro is a visceral experience, aided by 4A Games' fidelity towards the analogic machinery and equipment of the Metro. Guns rattle and clink and jam and overheat, ammo can be scarce, and the shadows are your friends. Gameplay is broken up into several key areas, specifically 3: gunplay, stealth, and exploration, and that gameplay occurs in primarily 3 stages: a station, in the ruins of a decrepit Moscow, or in the twisting and spiraling tunnels of the Metro. This is the primary loop of Metro 2033, and other than a handful of occasions will this formula ever deviate. It is incredible that I can look so fondly upon a game like Metro 2033, a game which has standard gun combat, subpar stealth, and a janky and rushed story. But even through all of this, the game manages to cement itself as so startlingly unique. At this point, I think it will be fruitful to turn to the story. A story which is filled to the brim with contrivances, conveniences, and contradictions, and yet somehow, even through this mess, it still manages to bring up provocative questions. The beat-to-beat story progression of Metro 2033 is simple, almost comically so. It's so simple, in fact, that on a big picture we can break the story down into 3 separate chunks. The Hunter's Call. Inciting incident, Hunter asks Artyom to travel to Polis to deliver a message to Miller for weapons and reinforcements to protect Exhibition Station. Artyom finds Miller. Artyom finds Miller, asks the council for aid, is rejected. Miller devises a plan to snatch a dossier which will reveal the location of a Soviet bunker, D6, where the Order will launch missiles into the nest of the Dark Ones. And finally, the tower. After starting a power in D6, Artyom and Miller are given the guidance system for the missiles. They must trek to the top of the tower and eliminate the Dark Ones. Now, there is quite a bit that happens between these beats, but on a rough story outline, this is it. And looking at it this way, one of Metro 2033's major flaws unceremoniously rears its ugly head. Most of the story content in the game occurs in the opening and closing hour. There is almost nothing of crucial story significance that occurs between that time. Now, this may seem a bit harsh, and in one respect it is, because frankly the story bits just aren't that good. But with Metro 2033, the story, at least in this game, was never what compelled me to keep playing. But let's quickly go over the plot for the first entry in the Metro series. The game begins with an opening prologue. Artyom and Miller traverse what appears to be an underground station while you get some tutorializing. You fight some mutants, head outside, and meet up with a group of rangers. There's a skirmish, you kill some mutants, are overrun by a flying demon, and the game cuts to black. Enter Chapter 1. Artyom is a 20-something-year-old living in the remnants of World War III. Russia has been destroyed, and humanity lives in the Metro stations to protect themselves from radiation poisoning and the mutated beasts which emerged in the aftermath of the war. You learn that your station, Exhibition, has been relentlessly attacked by mutants and Dark Ones, and that the station will soon fall if they don't receive aid. A ranger named Hunter has arrived in Exhibition. It seems like he's good friends with everyone, but the relationship is unclear, and Hunter is barely in the game long enough to develop any kind of emotional connection. Exhibition is attacked, and Hunter decides to investigate. He asks Artyom to go to Polis and find a man named Miller, presumably the man from the intro, if he does not return in 1 day. Hunter does not return, and Artyom prepares for his journey to Polis. Artyom hitches a ride with some traders heading to Riga. The trolley is attacked, you fight, and form a defensive position with the soldiers from Riga. Due to the attack, Riga has locked down all travel from the station. At Riga, for some reason, a man named Bourbon wants to speak to you. He knows a back way out of the station, and you travel with him. You do some stealth, kill some bandits, and wind up in Market Station. Bourbon has a history here. He seems to owe bullets and supplies to almost every guard and their mothers. He cuts a deal with one of the guards and prepares to leave the station to head topside. As you and Bourbon step out of the gates, some guards start screaming to stop you. Seems like Bourbon grifted his way out of this place too. Artyom and Bourbon are now in the Dead City. This is the blasted remains of the ruined Moscow. This level, in its starkness and coldness, is truly beautiful. It's also generally just a well-made level. Artyom and Bourbon are separated, and you have this interesting exchange where Bourbon tells you to watch out for the radioactive puddles, actually seconds after you dove full body into this radioactive sludge heap known as water. It has no lasting effects on gameplay or story. There's probably a better way to separate these two characters, but as it stands, this is what we've got. Artyom explores the dead city, kills mutants, and hides from demons. You also see a lot of Dark Ones in this section of the game, and they beam visions of the old world into your brain. It is the first time that we get the idea that the Dark Ones may not be what they seem. Eventually, Artyom and Bourbon meet up again and are overrun by demons, causing them to retreat back into the Metro. In the Metro, Bourbon is captured by bandits. Artyom sneaks or shoots his way through the bandits, all the while guards seem to drop dead almost at random. When I first played this, I thought my game was bugged, but it turns out that you have a mysterious admirer named Khan who follows you throughout this level. Artyom enters the room where Bourbon is being held, there's a scuffle, and Bourbon is killed. Khan reveals himself to be the man who is protecting you, and he asks you to follow him. I'll be saving this next section with Khan for later on in the video, but suffice it to say you learn more about the weird world of Metro. Artyom and Khan eventually come across a station in need of help, Artyom is enlisted to blow up some tunnels, and Khan stays with the group. Khan tells Artyom to find Andrew the blacksmith. Artyom enters Market Station and is immediately arrested for some unknown reason. You run away from the Reds and are eventually saved by Andrew the blacksmith. Andrew gives you a disguise and stows you away in a trolley car. Artyom is heading to the front lines. The war still rages between the Reds and the Nazis. The game also has its most pointed reference to ideology, serves as a good intro primer to the same ideology trap that Artyom falls into. You maneuver the battlefield, kill Nazis and Reds, and meet Rangers from Hunter's Order. They eventually save you from being killed by Nazis and take you to Polis. There's an awful turret section here, and the Ranger you're traveling with dies. You have to kill some Nazis who have a base topside, and you meet up with another Ranger who takes you to Polis. You finally meet Miller. He decides to help you and orders the Council to convene to attempt to get aid for exhibition. The Council denies aid, and Miller is upset. He says that he has a backup plan. There is a secret Soviet missile base that, if under Ranger control, could be used to wipe the Dark Ones off of the face of the planet. The problem? He doesn't know where the base is. He enlists you and a team to go and retrieve the plans for the base from the archives of the library. This section is fantastic. It has you maneuvering through the library, and it is a gorgeous environment. Eventually your team is attacked and one of your comrades injured, so you are asked to retrieve the plans alone. I'm also saving this next section with the librarians for later in the video, but basically you deal with a new enemy type known as the librarians. Stealth your way to the plans and escape. As you escape, the Rangers come to your rescue with a swanky car and take you back to their base. You assault D6, bring the station up to full power, and prepare for the strike, but the targeting system has been damaged and must be targeted manually. Artyom and Miller are given the targeting beacon and told that they must head to the top of the tower to target the nest. The game loops back around here, and after the demon attack, Miller and Artyom travel to the top of the tower. They make it to the top, and Miller is injured. Artyom heads to the top of the tower, but has a vision from the Dark Ones. They know that Artyom intends to kill them. They try to stop him. Here you can either run from the Dark Ones or embrace them. Depending on your morality points, you will receive two different endings. The canonical ending is that Artyom escapes the vision and blows up the Dark Ones. In the alternate ending, you do not blow up the Dark Ones, realizing that they wish to live in peace with humanity. And that's the story of Metro 2033. You'll notice that a lot of this game is an elaborate follow quest. That's maybe my biggest problem with it. It wants to be a Call of Duty game, follow this guy type of storyline, but with an incredible world. This story is mostly a bust outside of the ending, which I'll talk about later towards the end of the video. The beauty of the Metro resides in its atmosphere and world design. The first game in the series serves as a proof of concept that is never cogently articulated or maturely realized throughout the course of the game. It is a true identity crisis which the game mechanically struggles with, and which reaches its apex of maturity only in the final installment of the series. I will have a longer form video dedicated to Metro Exodus, but suffice it to say it is a better game on nearly every front. But I want to put forward that Last Light is also a better game than 2033 on almost every dimension. The team at 4A really grew into its series, and it shows with the subsequent installments. One area that Metro 2033 pioneered for the series, but I think resoundingly failed at, was its moral points system. Unspoken and unaddressed throughout each of the 3 games is a morality system. This is an implicitly construed morality system that is tallied through your engagement with the systems and world of Metro 2033. Listen to conversations and you find your screen shimmering blue and white on its edge, symbolizing the gaining of a morality point. Through your naturalistic and diegetic engagement with the world and characters of the Metro, you will find yourself gaining morality points. There are instances as early as Chapter 1, string the guitar in Artyom's room, gain a morality point. Help a father in exhibition who is lacking funds by providing him with a military-grade bullet, gain a point. There are dozens of opportunities throughout the game for you to gain these points, but never once do these choices feel legitimately meaningful. Artyom's moral fidelity being tested by strumming guitar strings makes me think that this system was woefully underbaked. While I can appreciate the gesture, I generally dislike games that have a binary morality system, do the good option or the bad option. Metro is all the more frustrating because it does not have a system like this. The choices, if implemented properly, would allow the player character to legitimately struggle with the systems in the game in an effort to maintain Artyom's sense of moral responsibility. A properly implemented morality system inculcates the player in the world, the choices, and the characters. It exposes how our enjoyment is inextricably linked to some of the most violent and horrific elements of the game world. Our enjoyment, which takes the form of these violent fancies, is indelibly tied to the frenetic gunplay of the first-person shooter. It is important to note that this enjoyment is also directly tied to the bad ending of the game, the ending which leads to the extinction of the Dark Ones. This ending is the logical conclusions of our murderous romps, yet in the world of Metro there is no other choice, and I want to say that this is not some narrative mea culpa, we had no other options, but rather mechanically the game does not prioritize or incentivize its stealth mechanics, or the choice which is already baked into that very system. Stealth, outside of the conservation of ammunition, has no consequential ramifications on player choice. There is this false choice presented between kill or knock out, but the distinction between the two of them is nil. I say this obviously understanding that the true distinction presented here is between the snuffing out of life or the preservation of life, yet there are no consequences on the story, characters, or game world for this distinction. This doesn't sit right with me because the consequential end point of the story, where all of these decisions lead to, is down this pathway of snuffing out life or preserving it, as will become evident. Metro 2033 attempts here to have its cake and eat it too. It wants the frenetic high-octane gunplay and the stealth with none of the consequences. At the end of the day, Metro 2033 is unable to shed its strictly linear framework, which ends up hampering much of its experimental gravitas and disconnecting the mechanics of the gameplay from a story which tallies your morality points. It seems, almost on a first go-around, as if there's less foresight than the moral systems of some 90s adventure games. But while I believe that this system is poorly implemented and developed in the game, I can see the strands of what could have been. Sadly, there's another undeniable facet of this entire dynamic. Why is it here at all? What purpose does the implementation of moral points serve at all? It's important to look to other recent games to see the actual mechanical purposes that a system like this serves. We don't have to look much further than the Dishonored series. Dishonored follows a similar system revolving around low and high chaos. The low and high chaos is determined by how the player character interacts with the environment and with the enemies. Does Corvo kill or knock out? Does he seek creative non-lethal solutions to the demise of those who framed him, or does he simply kill them? Explicitly, the game prioritizes the distinction of these two chaos states through real in-game world effects. If you have high chaos, rats will flood the streets, enemies follow stricter routes and are more prepared for close quarters combat, and Emily watches all from the sidelines, fully aware that Corvo is condoning the use of murder. This has lasting repercussions for her character that will fundamentally alter the shape and trajectory of her character. There are lasting implications, both in a narrative and a gameplay sense. Sadly, Metro falls short on these fronts. The world does not react to Artyom's actions, and that critique is not just reserved for the morality system. Metro 2033 seems to routinely forget that Artyom is a character at all. Instead, the game often places agency into the hands of NPCs that Artyom must dutifully follow. Artyom walks a tightrope. On one hand, his journal entries are some of the most beautiful writing in the game, and you develop an intimate familiarity with Artyom. You read through his thoughts and feelings, and it's genuinely impressive just how much I grew to care for him. But outside of these journal entries, you would never get an inkling or a suspicion that Artyom was anything more than the protagonist of the latest Call of Duty. The creative decision to make Artyom a silent protagonist is a detrimental fault with the game, and it's an especially glaring one considering the fact that between levels, Artyom is fully voiced. There's a level of dissonance between the loading screen and journal Artyom and the actual gameplay, making Artyom feel like two distinctly different characters. This poor characterization is not strictly limited to Artyom, as arguably every character in the game suffers. I was actually going to have a section here about some of the major players in the game, but I quickly realized that there is very little to say about them. In fact, I would argue that this absolute dearth of characters in the game is best exemplified by Hunter. He's a ranger from the Order, the first one who we meet in Chapter 1. He's introduced in the chapter, and outside of a brief audio log in the Dead City, he is never heard from again. His entire inclusion in the game is to give Artyom a reason to go to Polis. Obviously, his character is more fleshed out in the book, but here he is nothing. He is in the game for a measly 5 minutes, yet he is also the entire impetus for the quest. There's one character that we'll talk about, but I'll save him for the last section. But again, when I think about this and grow frustrated, I simply remember that Metro is not about its characters. At least not 2033. The world of the Metro is a character, though, in its own right. It is dead, and it sighs with a heavy heart. It is relentless and unforgiving, yet filled with an unexplainable wonder. Unsurprisingly, it reminds me of Stalker, the Tarkovsky film. The zone in Stalker is not some average locale. It has a sense of place. It has been fundamentally altered, and it is alive. And it has changed. The world of Metro is dead. It is the remnants of a bygone age. An age that Artyom romanticizes, that Artyom reflects upon and dwells in and wishes to return to. Yet it is this very age that led to the world he lives in now. The dead world. When I think of Metro, I think of 2 levels and a dream sequence. The first one is the mission with Khan. This section with Khan is some of my favorite stuff in the game. The world of Metro is gritty, run down, and devoid of hope, but occasionally you have these magical moments where there's genuine mysticism and awe surrounding the horror. There's this great moment where Khan says that, quote, this tunnel has to relive its past over and over again, end quote. And it's mostly unexplained. And I'm good that this is mostly unexplained. There's something so genuinely unsettling and unnerving about this entire experience, and Khan is probably my favorite traveling companion in the entire game for precisely that reason. I also find this notion forwarded by Khan that, quote, heaven, hell, and purgatory were atomized as well, end quote, to be really biting stuff. There are actually a few ways that we can read that line, one being that literally heaven and hell were wiped away, but I think that the more radical gesture is to read that the atomization of life is the atomization of all semblances of hope, and that one's obvious. But I think there's another component to this, that with the atomization of life, it's the atomization of all fictions. Fictions are dispelled, tucked away. My next favorite moment of the game occurs in the library, and it's actually a testament to the strength of this section that I consider it to be one of the best levels in the game, while also completely sucking the life out of the story. It's not that the story is difficult, in fact I argue the exact opposite, but rather that the connective narrative tissue seems to flounder in this section. What moral decisions there were in the game just drop out on this back half. Yet despite this obvious narrative discrepancy, I found the library level to be one of the most engaging levels in the entire game. It really is a breath of fresh air and requires you to, for the first time, prioritize stealth as a necessary element of gameplay. The librarians, gigantic husks of meat, bone, and flesh, are virtually indestructible. You'll need to hide and run to live. I think the librarians are probably my favorite enemy type in the entire game, and it's sad that they only appear in this level. The librarians are smart, even smarter than the human enemy AI. They are brutally and relentlessly stalking you. They want you to feel uneasy. You are their prey. The entire section with the librarians reminded me of Nemesis, or the alien from Alien Isolation. It's just such a great moment where the game captivated me and really solidified its horror roots as a gameplay mechanic. Sadly, these enemies only appear once in the entire game, and from this moment onwards, you can basically just forget about stealth as a valid gameplay mechanic at all. There will be no opportunities for you to use stealth after this encounter with the librarians, which is so sad, after we just had this great moment. And finally, the dream sequence. The game had been using hallucinatory dream sequences throughout to solidify the connective bond between Artyom and the Dark Ones. But this final dream sequence is the one that sells the entire driving stake of the story. The Dark Ones are not our enemies. They are just as scared and alone as we are, clutching for some flicker of hope in the dimness of life. And we repay them in blood. In that same interview that I mentioned earlier with VG247, Glukowski explains that the Dark Ones are a veiled commentary on racism. The interviewer goes on to say that, quote, "In Metro, the humanoid enemies known as the Dark Ones aren't actually evil and wish to coexist with the humans, but a fear of the foreign causes the story's hero to perform a reckless, inhuman act." End quote. The Metro series opens us to a conversation on the ideological necessity for an other. The Dark Ones fit this perfectly. They are a sentient species which has burgeoned from the cataclysmic collapse of humanity. Yet to provide some type of stability, some type of exterior force for humans to compare themselves to, they must perceive of the Dark Ones as a truly malignant force. And while the obvious ideological struggle rages in the twisting tunnels of the Metro, Artyom himself has committed in the canonical ending the most radical ideological maneuver with the destruction of the Dark Ones. It's so salient then when Artyom runs from the approaching Dark One in the final dream sequence that instead of learning from the words of Khan, he heeds Hunter's advice. As the Dark One is shot and collapses, so does Artyom. What was considered an external foe, totally inhuman, was in fact precisely that, inhuman. Something more than human that marks that little piece of the real. And Artyom, rather than confronting that, dwelling in that contradictory space of the Dark One, the inhuman that is more than human out there, he blows it up, solidifying a strict, unwavering, uncompromising ideological edifice. It is an ideological edifice which runs antithetical to the entire character of Khan. If there is one character that we can and should discuss, it is Khan. I wouldn't say that he's the most believable character, the most well fleshed out. In fact, he is deliberately mysterious, a veritable wizard. No, Khan is the most fundamentally human character. He's the one saving grace that stops the game from being Call of Duty in the Apocalypse. He is the very soul of Metro 2033. I don't say this lightly. If Metro had a thesis, one single line which resoundingly encapsulated the entire aesthetic, the entire atmosphere of its world, it would be this line uttered by Khan. Quote, "Force answers force. War breeds war, and death only brings death. To break this vicious cycle, one must do more than just act without any thought or doubt." End quote. Khan's words ring true. They ring with the force and tenacity that only lived experience can properly verify. It's a line that rings with soul and purpose. And yet, Khan is the only character who is able to muster anything close to this powerful writing. Miller and Hunter and Ullman and the rest of the Order provide nothing of substance. And maybe that's the point. maybe we're meant to believe they're just as delusional as the Reds and the Nazis. Maybe. But the lack of any mechanical affirmation makes this feel hollow and aimless. Those last points that I made about the stealth mechanics are not superfluous, at least they're not meant to be. Instead, I view this as the fundamental, almost fatal flaw of this game. I want to listen to Khan, but the game only allows me to do so in moments that feel like afterthoughts. Why does this matter anyway? Because Khan's message is not an aesthetic choice, something that you can rectify and implement through charity alone. No, it is a way of life, an ethical choice, a proper dilemma. A dilemma that is never fully or adequately explored through the form of the video game medium. I, as a player, don't have to make any sacrifices to uphold and satisfy Khan's will. I can haplessly kill, and never once encounter the fundamental contradiction which exists between the story and my mechanical actions. Overall, the game moves at such a breakneck pace, with such a thin plot, the true radicality of this ending can become lost. As a game, its shooting is fine, the stealth is lackluster minus the librarian section, and its upgrade system works fine. Metro 2033 does nothing overly spectacular on a gameplay front, but insofar as it establishes a world and an atmosphere, it stands as a good introduction to this series. Sadly, the lack of any authentic characterization on the part of Artyom or any of the other characters aside from Khan, quite frankly leaves this first game in the series to be lacking in several key areas. We'll see that this is something that the series will develop throughout the rest of the games, but 2033 stands apart from the other two entries in the series as severely sloppy, yet still showing so much potential. It is sad that it takes until the literal end moments of the game for something resembling a plot to emerge, but what makes this a series worth truly considering resides in that ending. Sadly, the rest of the game does not live up to that excellent moment of watching Artyom sit atop the tower as the world burns again. Of the entire series, I knew that the 2033 video would run the shortest because, simply put, there's not a great deal to talk about. Obviously, I just ended up writing 5,500 words, so there was a lot to talk about. But there's more in this series than just the stumbles of this first game. This first game lays the foundation for the next two games in the series, and I consider those to be stellar. And I hope after this series of videos that you do too. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment down below with any suggestions or remarks to improve the quality of these essays and the footage that I capture. Also, please leave a comment if there's anything you'd like for me to tackle after the Metro series is over. I'm considering putting together a video on the newest Fallout 76 Wastelanders and also a video on Fallout New Vegas. I think both of these are severely necessary. But I don't want this channel to simply be a post-apocalyptic channel, so I'm thinking of other stuff to kind of throw in between. So if you have any suggestions, please leave them down below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.